to lunch, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Colleen Johnson of Pro Kanban. I'll let Colleen do the detail on that, but Colleen has flown in all the way from the USA. You guys are getting it. So without further ado, Colleen, the stage is yours.
All right, we're going to switch the slides around here. One moment. All right. My name's Colleen Johnson. Like I said, I'm here from Denver, Colorado, where it's about to snow this week, so I am a sweaty mess. But I'm really happy to be here, and it's been an amazing experience being in Accra for the week with all of you and learning from you and learning from everyone here today. So first of all, thank you for inviting us to join this conference and this event. We're going to talk today about WIP. You know what WIP stands for? It's not made out of leather in this case. WIP stands for work in progress or work in process. So I have 3 children, and when I was pregnant with my first, I decided I would take up knitting. I don't know why. It seemed like a good idea. I was doing a lot of sitting around as a pregnant person, and I was like, I'm going to learn how to knit. I bought a ton of yarn, and I started all these different knitting projects. There's a sweater, some quilts, a hat. All this stuff is still half done. So I like to do craft projects. I apparently don't like finish them. Let's see. Clicker. Can you jiggle the clicker back there? There we go. All right. So my craft projects at my house here are all work in progress. This is all work that is started but not yet finished. I have the best intent. Janae, you probably have a gift somewhere in my house that's half made. I'm sure of it. So when we think about WIP, all of these things that we start and don't finish have a cost associated with them, right? And we're going to talk about what those different things are today and how you can start to manage this. So when you think about WIP, who has to go back to work on Monday and probably pick up a bunch of stuff that they left to come to the conference? And that's probably a bunch of work you started, right? You put on pause so you could come join us here. How does that make you feel? Does anybody? Yeah, maybe a little stressed out about what Monday's going to look like, right? So WIP creates this anxiety for a lot of us of the stress of all of this unfinished work. Apparently not if it's yarn-related work for me, but so when we talk about, I don't know, sorry, my slides aren't advancing here. Can you next on the slides? Is it just not reaching you? Okay. So when we start thinking about work in progress here, this is, like I said, all these unfinished projects that we have lying around. And there's a cost, right? There's a cost to the work that we pull in, not just because it isn't finished, right? And we're sitting on unfinished work, but we also haven't had a chance to learn. So you just heard everyone up here on the panel talk about the value of delivering things incrementally, small bets, small batches, so that you can get feedback sooner. So for all of this work that we've started that we have not yet delivered, we have not had a chance to learn from it yet. And that means we've got basically a bunch of feedback that we haven't received yet from this work. Maybe if I stand on this side. Okay, there you go. So when we talk about WIP, if you've ever heard the term WIP limits, that's where a lot of our minds go, right? Work in progress limits. And we're going to talk today about ways that you can start to limit the amount of work that you have in progress. And that can be personally, that can be as a team, that can be as an organization, that can be government initiatives, they would probably limit some of the WIP that they have in place in terms of how many projects they're working on. And we're going to talk about the benefits of limiting the amount of work that you have in process. Limiting WIP is actually pretty hard. We're all really, really terrible at this for a variety of different reasons. Now it's going ahead without me. And I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch at this point. What? Yeah. Oh, wait. I wonder if we even could just get closer. Maybe if I stand down here. I think it's plugged into mine, though. And worse still, there's a bunch of pictures of food in this deck. So you're going to be mad at me. All right, well, let's talk about why we suck at it while we're figuring out the slides. We suck at limiting our WIP because we want to take in new work to be a good team player. We don't want to say no when someone comes and asks us for something, even if we're really, really busy, right? Somebody's going to come and tap you on the shoulder and say, this is really important. Can you pull this work in? So we say yes, even though we probably don't have the bandwidth or the capacity or the attention to do that new work item. So a lot of times we say yes because we're trying to be a good team player. For a lot of teams and organizations, we say yes to new work because it's urgent, right? The priorities have changed. Yes, there we go. Thank you. There we go. So everything is a top priority. Everything the organization wants to work on comes in and it's urgent, and we have to start on it right away. Awesome. Thanks, guys. We also want to be valuable, right? So we say yes to work so that productive. We want to look very productive on our team, for our leaders, for our managers. So we're not going to say, no, I can't pull that in. We're going to say, yes, I'll take in new work, even if I'm going to pull it in and it's going to sit there for a while. I hear also from a lot of organizations that we'll never come back to it. Does anybody struggle with this? So we pull new work in and we don't want to say no because we want to make sure that we're getting that work in progress, even if we're not actively working on it, because we'll never get a chance to come back to that work item. I hear that a lot from development teams. So all of these things make it really hard for us to bring focus to what we do because we're constantly saying yes to new work. So I want to introduce you today to some concepts here that can help you hopefully start to think about how to limit how much work you have in progress. We're going to talk a little bit about a pull system, and what you see here is a Kanban board. Across the top of the Kanban board, you have different stages of a workflow. In this example, we have to-do, development, code review, QA, and deploy. But this could be purchase yarn, find a pattern, right? Measure out the sweater, right? So you can build a workflow for your system based on any different type of work that you're doing. We'll use this example here today to talk about a software development team. And then what you can see here at the top of this board is there's a number at the top of the board, at the top of each column or each stage of this workflow, and that is the work in progress limit. When we talk about the power of these work in progress limits, what we're trying to do is create a constraint in our system that's forcing us to make decisions about what to work on next and giving us the ability to say no to pulling in new work. So what would happen if this green card in the development column was done? It's done, so I need that to go to code review, right? I'm going to go tap the person who's going to do the code review on the shoulder and say, this one's ready. I'm going to set it on your desk. They'll probably say yes, right? They want to be a good team player. But what actually would happen in a system that had WIP limits in place is that that ticket could not move into the code review column until there was capacity. So we're saying there's only the capacity to do one code review at a time for this team. And when that white card moves out of the code review column, then they can pull that work item into the next stage of the workflow. Do we have any testers in the room? QA folks? a few. I started my career out as a tester, and you're often staring down a pile of work that you feel like you're never going to catch up with, right? The developers are cranking out stuff for you to work on, and you're getting this massive pile up of things that you feel like you're going to have to work all weekend to try to clear out. That's what we're trying to manage when we start to introduce this concept of work in progress limits. And we're going to set those work in progress limits based off the capacity that we have as a team. So the next step is, how do we make space for work to move downstream here in this pull system? In that example where the green ticket might be the one that's ready to move, maybe the ticket that's in code review is not close to finishing. The team can start to say, what can we do as a team to swarm together on this work to try to make capacity for work to move downstream? Maybe that's jumping in on that orange ticket that's in the QA column. So we start to have a conversation around what's the closest to moving and how can work move downstream to create that capacity. So why does this matter? Why it feels like rules, feels like structure. Maybe nobody wants to deal with these WIP limits. It sounds too hard. What is it going to do for you as a team or as a business or even as an individual? I think it's going to bring 4 things, and we're going to go through each one of these. It's focus, it's flexibility, it's follow through, and most importantly, as we start to think about creativity, it's a sustainable pace of work so that you can focus and not be burnt out. I promised you some pictures of food. Okay, so let's talk about focus first. One of the goals we have in limiting our work in progress is to bring focus to what we're working on, right? They say that context switching or multitasking can reduce your efficiency by 20% every time you switch to a new task. And think about what that looks like during our day. We're going to meetings, we're dealing with different maybe fires from urgent requests coming in from our manager. All of those things are multitasking or context switching. And this makes it really hard for us to focus. Focus is really important in probably everything that we do, right? We want to have the ability to do great work, to do our best work, and the more we're switching gears all the time, the more it's hurting our ability to do that great work. This is an important thing from a quality perspective, right? So when we start to think about all that context switching and pulling one task and starting another task, that has an immediate impact on our ability to deliver high quality work. So it's November in the United States. That means Thanksgiving is right around the corner. And when I start to think about WIP and some of the conversations that it drives, I think one of the most important things that starts to happen for a team who's managing their work in progress is that you start to talk about priority. What's the highest priority item to pull in, right? Well, I love to cook. I especially love to cook Thanksgiving dinner for my family. And the turkey is the star of the show. It really is. But I also live in a small house with a small little oven. And so I have to get up at 5 a.m. and get this turkey in the oven first. There's a lot of other things that go into a U.S. Thanksgiving meal. There's pie, there's pumpkin pie, there's rolls, there's stuffing, mashed potatoes, all these things, right, that go into a traditional American Thanksgiving meal. And almost all of them require some space in my tiny little oven. But I have to make a decision when I wake up on Thanksgiving morning of what's going to get the priority spot, right? Because without the turkey, there's no Thanksgiving dinner. So think about that. When you have space, when there's space for something on your team, if you're managing the amount of work in progress, we're saying, what's the most important thing for me to work on right now? Instead of saying yes to every single thing. So that's the first thing you'll gain. You'll gain that focus and you'll gain that clarity on what's the highest priority work item. And that's going to help you with multitasking, right? So we're going to focus on that one thing. We're not pulling everything into in progress, and we're going to adhere to that WIP limit to help us minimize multitasking. Right, the next one here is flexibility, which I think can sometimes seem a little counterintuitive when we're talking about WIP limits, because that can seem like a very rigid structure to have in place. But what starts to happen when you have work in progress limits in your system is that it's reducing the amount of change that you have going on at any given time, right? You have less projects in flight, you have less work items in flight because you're reducing the amount of work in progress. This makes it a lot easier to reprioritize when something urgent comes in, right? Back to the prioritization. So instead of having 20 things in progress, if I have 2 things in progress and something new comes in that's urgent, I can respond to that more quickly because there aren't so many other things on my plate. We call this in Kanban just in time, right? Just in time prioritization. So instead of trying to queue up a bunch of work for the team months in advance, I'm gonna wait until there's space, till the team says, hey, I've got capacity, I can pull new work. Then I'm gonna go figure out what the highest priority item is for that team to pull in next. So when we think about how WIP manifests here, the more work we have in progress, the more inventory we're taking up, right? In the States, there's a store called Costco. Has anybody heard of Costco? Where you can buy a bunch of shit you really don't need in giant boxes, like just boxes and boxes of stuff you don't need. I went there with my kids. They convinced me that this was a great snack, that they're like pouches of chia seeds in kind of like a jelly. Turns out no one likes them in my house. And I have a box of 60 of them. And so what happens when you buy stuff in bulk and you live in a tiny house is there's no room now for good snacks. So we have this conversation now about we committed to too much work in progress. It's taking up too much room in the pantry. And we have to get something done before we can get something that maybe they actually want to eat. So when we have too much work in progress, it creates inflexibility. And so starting to limit the amount of work we have in progress makes it easier. If I had maybe purchased like a 2-pack and not the box of these at Costco, it would be easier to convince them to get rid of those so we could make some room for probably something filled with sugar. I'm sure would be the next snack. So this helps us manage churn, right? Limiting the amount of work that we have in progress because we're focusing now. It's easier and more flexible to decide what to work on next because we don't have so many things in progress and we're not sitting on all of this inventory that's making it really hard for us to pull that new work in. I promise that's it for food pictures. Okay, our next one I promised was follow through. In Kanban we say stop starting, start finishing. It's my next tattoo. And so when we think about getting things, our whole goal in a Kanban system or a flow-based system is to get things done as quickly as possible so we can learn, right? We can get feedback as quickly as possible. This concept of restricting how much work is moving through our system is helping us push things to done sooner. So instead of always looking at what can I pull next, we're always asking the question of what can I get to done next. A great concept when you're thinking about this pull system and this focus on follow through and this focus on getting things to done is that your WIP limit isn't really a limit, it's a signal of capacity to pull in new work, right? Has anybody here ever been in an IKEA? Do those exist here in Africa? Are there? Okay. Scandinavian furniture store. And maybe the worst place to take small children shopping because they can climb on everything and they can touch everything and it's like a giant house of stuff and they are in everything. But you don't have to shop with your children at IKEA. You can drop them off in a play area. And when you come into the IKEA, there's this play zone right at the entrance and they don't have a very formal check-in process if you would like to have your kid play while you shop. They just have these vests hung up across the wall. And that vest is telling you if there's a vest, there's space for your kid. If there's no vest, you're screwed. You're gonna have to shop with that kid. And so this is a way that they're showing the capacity they have to have more kids in that play area. So think of your WIP limits not so much as I'm saying you can't do more and I'm saying you can't work on more things. It's a way for you as a team to say this is the capacity we have as a team to do our best work, our best thinking. And if we exceed that amount of work, it's going to have all these other negative impacts for us. So think of WIP as a signal of capacity. And then we want to minimize starting new work. The question came up. We had a chance to talk with some folks from Vodafone yesterday, and the question came up, well, if we're at our WIP limit and we can't pull in new work, what do you want me to do? You want me to just sit there? I'll probably get fired, right? My manager is going to have a problem with the fact that I'm not pulling something new in to work on, even though maybe our team WIP limit is at its max. What other things do we do? Well, the most important thing here is that we're not starting new work, right? That growing pile of work, that growing pile of stress. When I have capacity, I want to look at other places in the system and say, how can I contribute to getting something else in this all this work in progress into that done column. So if this is what my board looks like, and I come back to work on Monday, instead of going to the to-do column, I might say, is there anything in QA I can help with? Or is there anything in code review I can help with? And we start to have a conversation about moving the stuff that's closest to done over the finish line. All right, our next one here is pace. And so when we talked about the theme for these 2 days of creativity, this is what really stood out to me and why I wanted to spend this time with you talking about work in progress limits. We all tend to burn ourselves out, right? Whether that's individually, as a parent, as an employee, as a colleague, because we are all running at a frantic pace trying to get things done. But what often happens, right, is that burnout, that churn leads to all those negative consequences of poor quality and stress, right? And then it also means that we are not very predictable in when we're going to get things done. So you think about all of the timelines we have. We have a lot of folks here from government sectors, and when you think about all of those deadline-driven projects, probably one of the biggest factors in whether or not you're going to hit those dates is how much work you're working on at any given time, right? It's easy for me to say I'll have this project done on Friday, but if I'm working on 10 things at the same time, what's that going to do to that estimate I just gave you for when my project's going to be completed? So we want to start to think about how WIP limits can help us prevent that burnout, prevent that stress, and give us space and time to do our best work and think creatively. There's an airline in the States called Southwest Airlines. And they have a very unique boarding process to get on these planes. So they have a slightly different model than most airlines, where instead of boarding from the back to the front of the plane, or boarding by, Robin, you were talking about group 1, group 2, or people with kids first. Instead of boarding that way, your ticket just has a number on it, like A15. And part of what Southwest has figured out is if they create small batches, back to our small batch size, right? They create small groups, the boarding process is more predictable in terms of how long it's going to take that group of people to get on the plane. So you don't have a seat number, you have a spot in line, and you're boarding in groups of 30. A1 through 30 goes. A31 through 60 goes. B1 through 30 goes, because that's more predictable because they're keeping the amount of people boarding at a consistent number so they can turn their planes over at the gate faster. So WIP helps us start to manage our cadence, right? When we keep our WIP consistent from a team perspective, we get more predictable with our delivery because we have the same amount of work in progress and we're starting to be able to measure how long it's taking to get those things done. So I think the other thing when we're thinking about creativity and burnout and stress is that there can be a lot of heroics on an agile team, right? Somebody who's going to jump in and get things over the finish line, someone who's really eager to maybe move up to a new role or a new challenge, and is going to spend their nights and weekends trying to get all this work over the finish line. By managing the amount of work we have in progress, we're trying to get rid of that, right? We're trying to say, as a team, we're going to work together and deliver together. And we don't want any one person on this team to be overburdened or overworked. So we're focusing on delivery as a team rather than individual utilization. So think of WIP. This is a picture from a parking garage where, and I think my words there maybe covered it up a little bit, but if you look at the top of this image, there's lights, right, over each parking spot. So instead of driving up and down each row, you can look down the row and look for a green light telling you there's a space available there. Think of your WIP limits as a go light, right? It's not a red light necessarily. It's a light saying, yes, we are ready to pull in more work. We have the capacity, the focus, and the space on our team or the space individually to pull that new work in and give it all of our energy and effort. So you all just learned Kanban. Did you know that? Everyone just passed their Kanban assessment. Okay, so this is Kanban, what you just learned. Kanban is a strategy for optimizing the flow of value through a visual pull-based system. You can apply this to Scrum. You can apply this to Waterfall. You can apply this to knitting projects, right? You can apply Kanban to anything. I had a Kanban system for my kids during COVID. so that they had to move all their tickets into the done column before they could ask for screen time, right? And they would do one ticket at a time, math homework first, reading homework next. You can apply Kanban to really any process, but it's all about limiting the amount of work we have in progress, focusing on getting things to done before we pull new work in, and doing that through this pull-based system. Our goal, and you've heard this from a bunch of speakers already today, is that by optimizing flow and optimizing things moving to done quicker, is that we are more efficient, and that means doing the most we can with the resources that we have available. It means that we're more effective, that we're giving customers what they want when they want it. So think of that, if we have too much WIP, if we have too much work in progress, it's harder for us to respond to what customers want when they want it. So reducing that amount of work in progress is going to help us be more effective in giving them what they want. And the last one, predictable. So think of that, the queuing process for Southwest Airlines, right? They're very predictable in how long it takes them to fill up that plane because they've managed the amount of work in progress to a repeatable amount of people boarding, and they know exactly how long it's going to take for everybody to get in their seats on that plane. At the end of the day, we talk a lot in Kanban about flow, and there's a saying, manage the work, not the people. I think that's a great thing to think about when we're doing stand-ups or when we're talking about, as a team, what needs attention next. But at the end of the day, there's people doing all this work, right? And being busy isn't better. Busy is not good for anyone. It's not good for our stress. It's not good for our health. It's not good for our hearts. So what we want to focus on here is how do we create that sustainable pace of work and a system that's going to help our team manage how much we're pulling in. I'm not going to read all of these to you. You can see them up there. There's a lot of benefits here. And when we think about all of these things manifesting for a team, you're going to have a happier, healthier team that's not burned out, that's delivering higher quality work with these simple measures, right? And it doesn't have to be, one of the questions we get a lot from a Kanban perspective is, what's the right WIP limit to set? I can't tell you that, right? There's a lot of factors there. How many people are on your team? Are there degrees of specialization? Maybe Sath is the only person that can write Java code, so we might have a specific WIP limit around that specialization. So we want to start to think about how much capacity does our team have, and then how are we going to use those work in progress limits to help us meter the amount of work we're doing to the capacity we have as a team or as a system. This can be applied to team of teams. It can be applied to the whole portfolio. That is everything I have for you all. There's some information up here about Pro Kanban. If you are interested in learning more about Kanban or WIP limits, we have a lot of free resources available. There's free books online. We have an open Slack community where you can come join Slack and ask questions of anybody there. And then there's some free assessments as well if you'd like to test out your flow knowledge after today.
Anything, did I? Rest your feet.
And thank you for all the help with the clicker and your patience.
Wow. So that was Kanban, walk through Kanban. So, you know the drill. So who has some questions for Colleen? Kanban is a strategy. So again, we're linking with the idea of thinking again. See the theme that's coming through here? To impact behavior, we've got to go through a thought process, haven't we? To manage our bosses, we've got to go through that thought process. In the UK, being busy shows that you're really hard-working. I've got to confess, I think it shows you're a little bit silly. That's controversial. I shouldn't say that. But if you think about it, rushing around, doing lots and lots of things, has been a space and a place, I would suggest, where a lot of people hide. Is it not? And people feeling a little uncomfortable. It's all right, I've done it as well. I learnt it quite young, actually.
It was just to build on your point. So you talked about busyness, how that could be deceptive and people want to look busy like they're doing stuff, but they're doing valuable work. But we also do in the UK have the concept of the busy fool, right? So do less, do it well, right? Everything Colleen's just talked about.
Okay, so first question.
Thank you very much. I've picked up quite a lot of things in your presentation, which I think is very good. Achieving a proper work-life balance at your place of work and balancing it with the volume of work that you do. Now, the main issue here is that you was learned to say no. But the issue is, how do you say no to a boss that is constantly delegating everything to you and not being in conflict with the boss as a result of saying no and trying to actually achieve the targets that you've actually got in your all the WIPs that you've got?
Okay, so the question, tell me if I got this right, is that how do you say no to a boss that's constantly bringing new work to you that expects it all to get done, right? So a big part of what we talked about with this concept of a visual pull-based system is that first word, right? It's very visual. And how do we make sure that we can see the trade-off decisions that we're making when we pull new work in? I think most of the organizations or managers or leaders that I've worked with that may seem like they are constantly reprioritizing work and constantly asking you to start something new and pull new things in, they're doing it because they can't see the cost, right? And I think most are not poorly intentioned, right? They're not trying to stress you out or overburden you or overwork you. They're probably also under pressure to get more done and more out the door. But they also can't see what you already have in progress, how long it's been sitting there, and how close it is to getting done, right? And so I think, especially as we start to scale Kanban in organizations, this portfolio level, right, of big projects, big initiatives, that's usually where we feel a lot of churn in a company. And as soon as we can start to have the conversation with executives, making the decisions about what we're going to work on next, to say, you know what, we've had this project in process for 6 months and it's almost done. Would you rather have me start on something new or get this thing out the door so we can recognize that value, right? Then you can have a conversation. They may still say, we have to start on this. But if we can't have the conversation about what we're trading for that work, what we're pausing to pull that work in, or what we're delaying getting over the finish line, then I don't feel like we can have a real fair conversation about starting the new work. And so that visibility in a Kanban system is so critical to having the right conversations. So does that help a little? Okay.
Great answer. Great question, great answer. And it is a challenge, isn't it? It's an absolute challenge where things are just laid on top of us. How do we say no? Oh gosh. I'm about to break my rule. My boss has come in and started waving my hand, so I'm going to be brave. Bah! Go away. No, I'm not going to be brave. You have a question. Oh, he has a question. You see what he did there?
I have a question.
You're just stressing me.
So people have been introduced to Agile. Some people know about Agile. Some people are just learning about Agile today. People are warming up to the idea, you know, enabler, make things faster, better, more quality. Organizations around the world adopting this wonderful process, strategy, enabler, whatever you want to call it. So we started in Africa with Scrum. Yeah. So first of all, mindset, then introduction, then Scrum. And we say Scrum is a framework and blah, blah, blah. So we've got Vodafone, MTN, a few other companies there, Ghana Post Authority, Fidelity Bank, just to name a few who have been doing Scrum. So the question is, we can or can we use Kanban with Scrum to make it more efficient and effective in the way of working? Because they're not, let's say,
Yes.
mutually exclusive, right? You can bring the two together and use Kanban to help Scrum, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm grateful for you asking this question, Nana. A big part of what we try to embrace at Pro Kanban is that Kanban and Scrum can live very happily together, and that Kanban can be kind of the power-up that a lot of Scrum teams need. I think there's two pieces here that can really help a Scrum process. The first is what we've just been talking about, right? Limiting the amount of work that we have in progress for, I would say, a lot of Scrum teams. I don't want to say the majority. Maybe you don't fall into this bucket, but most of the Scrum teams I've worked with start all of their user stories or all of their tasks at the beginning of the sprint, and then not a lot happens until the day before the sprint's going to close, and now everything jumps into the end, or all of it just gets piled onto the QA person, or whatever the last step is in getting that work out the door. And so WIP limits, all the things we're talking about, right? That continuous flow of work, that sustainable pace of work inside of your sprint, start to smooth that stuff out so that we're working on the highest priority items first. And instead of having, like, let's say we have 10 user stories in our sprint, instead of having 10 user stories that are 80% complete at the end of that sprint, we might have 8 stories done and the 2 lowest priority stories still in the backlog, right? So it's helping us focus on the highest priority items and move those things to done. So WIP limits on a Scrum board are a great place to start. The second thing we teach from a Pro Kanban perspective is this concept of work item age. And so I mentioned this a little bit with having that trade-off conversation. A lot of times when we have a lot of work in progress, we have no idea how long it's been in progress. And unfortunately, I feel like Scrum doesn't necessarily address this. You can lose track of this almost. Your 2-week chunks are flying by, and next thing you know, you've had a story in 6 sprints, right? Hopefully that's not happening, but it can, and it can be hard to catch. And so when we start to think about this concept of work item age, it's really making visible how old each ticket is on your board. And it can be also very simple to implement. So I usually, if you're working with tools like Jira, or even just a physical board, I have the team write the date they started in front of the ticket title, so that when we're doing our daily stand-ups, I can say, okay, it looks like this ticket is almost 2 weeks old. This seems like this is the highest priority for us as a team to get into done. What are we doing to get that done? And so that looking at work item age is a great way to see where work is stuck in your system and bring focus and priority to getting that stuff over the finish line. That can be really valuable at a team level, but I think, again, when you start scaling some of these practices up and looking at features or epics or large initiatives, those numbers can be pretty terrifying for a lot of organizations to see that maybe this feature that they thought was going to be a 3-month effort has been in progress for 2 years, right? So what do we want to do? Stopping that work is also an option, right? But what you're trying to do is have the right conversation sooner. Do we want to stop this work? Do we want to maybe split this into 2 separate projects? Do we want to put more resources on this project so we can get it over the finish line? All different options, but all conversations we often don't have, because once we start it, it's just moving along with all the other projects in flight.
Excellent. It was a good question from Nana. I have to give him that. But what's really interesting there is that you're using Kanban to instruct Scrum. You're looking at, I mean, when I was a Scrum Master, there was never a story that repeated or went into another sprint. It just didn't happen. Is that true for the rest of the Scrum Masters here? Could I have a show of hands? Who's the Scrum Master here? Yeah. Never happened, right? Never once, you see? So, however, if it did, in the odd time it did, there's a really good way that Kanban can be leveraged to make your sprints more efficient. I'll come to you. Is there questions? We'll do the lady and we'll come back. I got into trouble for missing a lady last time. Oh, see, I've missed her again.
Okay, thank you, Colleen, for your presentation. question is, if you have like a cross-functional team where you depend on other teams to maybe finish something on your board. To finish something on your board, right? At what point do you determine that something or a process has aged on your board that you have to bring it back to prevent like a deadlock sort of? At what point in the process or in the days, what point do you determine you have to bring this activity out of your board?
Yeah. So I think I heard you ask kind of two parts to that, right? If there's a dependency on another team, how long are we going to sit on it while we're waiting for that other team to get it done? And if it hits a certain amount of time, do we put it back, right? Back into the backlog or back, take it off the board. Typically, we want to try to avoid pulling work that's started back into the backlog, right? We have half-started work, and especially when we're talking about software development, then we're sitting on code that's not deployed, and that's really risky for, especially when we're talking about financial institutions and things like banks or highly regulated industries. If you've got half-done code that's sitting out there, you've got some risk that somebody's going to go develop on top of that, and then you're going to end up with something getting out into production that's not supposed to be there. So we usually try not to move backwards up the line, and when items do get blocked, whether that's blocked by our own team, blocked by another team or a dependency, or even blocked outside of our organization, we keep it on the Kanban board in the state that it got blocked in, and it still counts against your WIP limit. And I know everyone hates that. And the reason we do it is because you're trying to make it painful to go resolve that blocker, right? If I can't pull in new work because I'm blocked by another team, do you know what I'm going to do every morning? I'm going to go find that team. I'm going to bug them, right? I'm going to keep asking them, what do you need to do? Prioritize this work because you're blocking our ability to pull in something new. And it can, we have a tendency to sweep blockers out of the way so we can stay busy, like Robin said, right? I got to stay busy. So I'm moving this and I'm pulling in new work. But then what's going to happen? Nobody's going to make sure that gets unblocked because now we can't even see that it's a problem that we're waiting for another team or another person to address. And I think this is especially true when we think about leaders. Again, we have a tendency to feel like maybe the leaders aren't getting involved with the right things or helping address some of those issues in an organization where work is blocked. Again, if we move the blocker out of the way so we can stay busy, then what's the thing for them to fix, right? You look really busy. Great job. And so we want to make these things visible and to some extent a little painful so that we're driving out those conversations sooner. So I would say never move it back if you can, and keep it in the state that it's blocked in so that you can continue to track how long it's aging. Again, that being able to say this ticket's been blocked for 3 weeks because we're waiting for another team to do something, that's going to get a manager or a leader's attention pretty quickly, right? Because we're sitting on something we can't get deployed.
Thank you. That's a great question. It's a question which all teams really should be answering at the end of whether it's a sprint or whether the period allocated for the work, and often things just drift. So, thanks. That's great advice.
Thank you. This is going to be my final question, I promise you. I'm not a Scrum Master, but my understanding is that part of the functions of a Scrum Master is to reduce the amount of unnecessary work that actually comes to the team that might cause distraction to the team. And so doing, reducing the amount of WIP within the team. So my question basically is that, what is the main distinction between Kanban and Scrum, if there are any? Where is the line drawn? And how bold is the line in between both processes?
Yeah. I would say on paper, the biggest difference is going to be time boxes, right? So from a Scrum perspective, you are doing sprint planning, you're time boxing that to 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever your sprints are going to be. And then at the end of that sprint, you're hopefully delivering something that can be given to customers, you can get feedback on, right? And that should inform what you're going to work on in the next sprint. Where Kanban, the difference is that it's a continuous flow of work based on those WIP limits. So you're always pulling new work in as soon as there's capacity in the next stage of your workflow to pull it. So you don't really have those start and stop points that you would with a sprint. Now, I said on paper because I think the most recent version of the Scrum Guide actually encourages this concept of continuous flow. Another way to think about it is that you don't have to get to a WIP of 0 at the end of your sprint, right? You're just continuously working, and you're using the Scrum events to say, do we understand what stories are coming next? Do we know what priorities are coming through planning? We're still doing retrospectives based on how much we're delivering, but we're not trying to clear the queue of work every 2 weeks. And I think that can be a really great starting point for Scrum teams to say, we don't have to get to 0 at the end of each sprint. We're just going to focus on, let's see how much work we can get done in a 2-week period, but the board doesn't have to be empty, basically. So you're continuously pulling work in based on your WIP limits, and then you're still using the planning and retrospective events as a way to help your team improve and understand what's coming to them next. Does that seem scary? Does anybody feel like they could try that? Tell me more.
Does that answer your question? Awesome. Got another question over here.
So this is not really a question, but it's a change in mindset I got from Colleen's presentation. Is the fact that when there is a blocker and then it's aging, the team must come together and they make sure that every way possible we work together to move it into the done column. It's something I think we need to all adapt in our approach to work. And then I think that way blockers won't really stay for like 2 or 3 weeks, because we're all pushing together to just move that particular blocker away, and then the work can now flow. So it's a lesson I'm taking for myself and then my team here. Thank you.
Awesome.
As they say in Jamaica, pom pom, which translated means you understand it.
I thought it meant it was time for lunch.
Almost. Almost. Have we got any more questions? Any more questions? Okay, I think that was a really interesting session, some really good questions. Hopefully you got some good insights from the questions and the responses, which I thought were all excellent and relevant, really relevant stuff that, this is happening in your work day in, day out. Things are being blocked. Get together, swarm on it, move it. Check when you start to do a piece of work. Check the date. And you can manage the flow from that date. Really, really simple stuff, which is really easy to apply. And like the gentleman there said, it's about getting this into our thought patterns, because as human beings, we're just habitual animals, really. We just do the same thing over and over, and we need to disrupt those thoughts, and that's when we learn. So really great questions, really insightful responses. So let's give Colleen a real big hand of applause. Thank you very much, Colleen. Thank you.